Hi, Larry. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Be the GC with Larry Weiss. I'm going to give everyone about 20 seconds just to settle in. Folks are coming in from the waiting room, and then we'll get started.
Great. Good to see you, Gemma.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. I'm really excited about having this discussion with Larry on a couple of really relevant issues for us today. Just a few things about Larry. So Larry is a member of the ACC Board of Directors, and we're very lucky to have him spend some time with us today. Larry is currently the General Counsel at Emulate. Before that, he was the GC at Analog Devices, and he has spent a lot of time in the medical device space, including 20 years at Medtronic and some time as well as Covidien. And we're going to talk about Larry's various roles within the in-house community, and in particular, some leadership issues for today. So I do want to invite anyone who would like to ask a question. There is a chat. Please feel free to engage with us on any issue that you would like to raise with either Larry or myself, and we will manage those as we come in, as they come in. And in the meantime, so Larry, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you're doing well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the invitation, Gemma, and happy to talk with you today. And you know, first and foremost, thanks for inviting me to the conversation. When you first invited me, I immediately said yes. And then as I was thinking that this date was coming up on the calendar, it occurred to me, like, is anyone interested in what I have to say on these topics, and is anyone going to show up for this conversation? But it looks like we've got a bunch of people who have joined us, which is terrific.
Great. So I'd like to start the discussion to talk about leadership. And you have held a couple of GC positions and have been in a leadership role. When you think about the concept of authentic leadership, Larry, what does that mean to you? Can you describe that for us?
Sure, yeah. Well, you know, I think particular to sort of leadership roles in legal, I think first and foremost, it's a different job, right? You know, when people make the choice to go from a law firm to in-house, and I've talked to a lot of people considering that decision, I always emphasize it's a different job. Like, it's not just a different way of being a lawyer, it's a different job. And then when you continue in your career and you take on the responsibility to be a manager, again, it's fundamental change in the job. You know, you're not only responsible for the work that you do, but now you're responsible for, you know, this other person or multiple people, and managing them and helping them to be successful. And when your role becomes a leadership role, however you define that, it's again a different job, you know, and you have to think really about your responsibilities and what's most important about what's being asked of you. And I think a big part of it for me involves just being very mindful of the fact that it's most of what you are responsible for is not about you. It's about helping other people to be effective, helping people to be a part of a team. And because, I mean, in law school, they don't really train you in how to do this, you know, and so people learn from modeling, people learn from osmosis, and sometimes you see people in the business world talk about, you know, fake it until you make it. And what I've learned is, like, you can't do that when it comes to leadership. You have to be true to who you are, and that really requires spending a good amount of time thinking about that and being self-reflective, which is super uncomfortable. But you have to know really who you are and what made you who you are to really be able to lead in an authentic way. And one of the things I've talked to folks about over the years is that it's important to put in that work of really knowing who you are as a leader before you find yourself in a crisis moment. Because that's when, whether you've thought about it or not, that's when your true authentic self is going to come out as a leader, when the pressure's on and people are looking to you for guidance or help or perspective. if you haven't thought that through about how you're going to show up in that moment, it's probably too late, you know. And you know, I think in terms of sort of developing my own style, I guess I was fortunate in a lot of ways to have been hired into a company that had, you know, more authentic leadership than I think most companies do when I first went in-house. And the guy that hired me, our general counsel at the time, the people who ran the different functions, if you just walked into our cafeteria, you would not have been able to pick them out like that's the leadership team. They were regular people who happened to have important jobs. And so I saw that modeled for me very early in my career, that your job is important when you're in those roles. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're important, but your responsibilities are. Your responsibilities to other people are important. And having seen that modeled effectively, I mean, that's what helped make me successful when I worked for those people. And so I had a pretty good roadmap of how to do it myself.
You know, and it's very interesting using that example of folks in a cafeteria just sort of, you know, being equitable or lingering, because we talked a little bit when we thought about what we wanted to discuss today. We talked about empowering your people. And
Yeah.
as I was prepping for today's discussion, I thought to myself, well, you know, if you're not an authentic leader who understands those responsibilities, how can you possibly empower your people? So I'd like you to speak to that a little bit as well, those two and how they play together, and perhaps give us some examples of that in your career.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, again, it goes back to understanding that your job is different. I mean, I think one thing I've experienced over the years, not specific to legal, is that a lot of times people get promoted because they're good at doing a thing, right? They're a good engineer, they're a good controller in the finance department, they're a good contracts attorney, and a job opens up, and the next thing you know, they're promoted, and they may or may not have been given any training to what these additional responsibilities of managing people or leading a team are about. Frequently not, right? And that comes to light years down the road when someone says, why is the culture so bad in this department? Well, we promoted all these people who were good at doing a thing, but we never trained them in how to manage and lead. And I think when you think about, okay, how's my job different now? Well, I'm responsible for this group of people. Then you start thinking about, well, what do these people need to do to be successful? And I use the word team a lot. And just because people work together or are grouped together on an org chart or are part of the same function actually doesn't mean they're a team, right? You need to do something to make that environment possible. And so as a leader, when you start thinking, okay, I'm responsible for delivering this set of work to the company, and I have this group of people available to do it, it doesn't take long before you realize success isn't going to depend on me necessarily. It's going to depend on all of us. And so, then you start thinking about, right, who can help me make this happen? Who's ready to take on more? Who's ready to do more? And again, just very fortunate that when I left the law firm and went in-house, I ended up working for someone who was really willing to ask me and others to do something, even if we'd never done it before, right? So we need an FCPA program. We need a trade compliance program. Go do that, right? I don't think I knew what FCPA stood for when I was first asked to take on that project. But so having grown up in an environment where people were trusted to, like, hey, go figure it out and come back to me and I'll help you. We'll think it through. I'll coach you, but it's okay that you're not an expert on this. I trust you to figure it out. Having seen that work and having seen that, frankly, be really good for me, then you start thinking, who else would welcome this kind of opportunity? And not everyone will, right? Not everyone wants that kind of greenfields, ambiguous opportunity to do something new. So that's the other part of it, is kind of the situational leadership part of it, to know that we're all wired differently and different people can be successful in different ways. And as a leader and a manager, it's actually up to you to know how to shift gears for people and put them in a position to succeed, and not just say, well, this is the way I like to work, so, John and Jane, this is how I'm going to expect you to work. because people are wired differently. So you have to think really critically about that.
So give me some attributes when you think about authentic leadership. Can you list a few and how they play for in-house counsel in particular?
Sure. Yeah, good question. Well, I think I don't know if people are naturally self-reflective. I'm not, but you kind of have to force yourself to do it, right? So it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable sometimes to look frankly in the mirror and say, like, what am I good at? What am I not good at? But when you do that, you understand what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and you can sort of operate in a way that leans into your strengths as a leader and set up some processes and structure, or even leverage people on your team that compensate for your weaknesses as a leader. And then tied into that, I think for me personally is one of the most important parts of authentic leadership, which is humility. So, if you're going to get anything out of that exercise of looking deeply at who you are, what you do well, and what you maybe don't do as well as some other folks, you have to be humble about the fact that you're not perfect. And to me, that's a key ingredient in this recipe, because once you accept that or really embrace it, now you're set up to actually recognize the fact that the best person on your team to solve a problem frequently is not you. And then you're really welcome the opportunity to add people to your team.
Cultivating, Medtronic, and Analog Devices. The guy I was going to introduce you to.
Julie, we can hear you. Sorry about that, Larry.
That's okay.
Sounded like she was talking about you.
It's possible. I told you, Gemma, that we might hear from my dog at some point today, but we heard from Julie as well. So it's all good. But the point I was going to make is, like once you're comfortable with this idea that you're not the smartest person in the room, and that there are folks on your team who are better positioned to solve any number of problems than you are, then you start building a more talented team, and you start giving your people more of an opportunity to contribute. And maybe related to that is the willingness to own up to the fact that you're not going to be right all the time. You're going to make mistakes. You as a leader might fail sometimes. Your team might fail sometimes because of your judgment or the way you manage an issue. And you need to be transparent about that and not shy away from it. And because failure really is a big part of long-term success. I mean, you don't want to fail too often, but it happens, and you need to acknowledge it and learn from it in order to grow and develop as a leader in a team. So I'd say those would be some of the really important attributes. And I should mention, like, when I first took on my first role as a manager, I remember talking to my boss about this and saying, like, is there a book? Is there some training of some sort? And he's like, no, you'll figure it out. Because he was kind of a you'll figure it out kind of a guy. And so then I went and talked to my partners in HR, and they're like, oh yeah, no, we have training on this. And so I went and got trained up by our HR team. I think situational leadership was the first kind of ever training I had as a manager or leader. But then I came to kind of like reading about this stuff, and years later stumbled upon Bill George's writing. He was the former CEO of Medtronic when I got to Medtronic, and kind of well known for his teaching on leadership at Harvard and elsewhere. And I learned a lot from his books. He's got a great book called True North, which is all about authentic leadership. And it really helped me piece together some of the things I felt like I had seen and learned intuitively or through osmosis. He had sort of put some framework around it. And so, I mean, that's something I'd recommend to anyone who's interested in taking on a bigger role as a leader.
So you've spent a few minutes now talking about reading and learning and training. What is your view on how much of this can in fact be learned, and what is just intuitive, or, it's the old nature versus nurture question, I guess, applied to in-house leadership?
Yeah, sure. Well, having managed a lot of people over the years, one of my assignments at one point was to build an international legal team from scratch. When we spun out from Tyco, we didn't have a team, and I was asked to build it, from first hire. And that was an interesting exercise because, how often do you get to build, literally from scratch? And again, not something I had any training on. So I spent a lot of time calling people who had a job title like the one I was going to be getting, saying, hey, what's your team look like, and why'd you decide to put it that way? But having managed particularly that group, because it was a large global group of people with different backgrounds, but even the roles since then, where I've managed teams, I think a lot can be taught. I think people obviously come with some natural abilities, or passion, I guess, is maybe more important as a leader. Some people are passionate about that, about leading people and being involved in a team, and some people not so much. I don't know you can teach someone who's not interested in it to be passionate about it in an authentic way. But I think a lot of the things that make good leaders can be coached and taught. Communication is the biggest example of it, right? I think people have their own natural communication style, but when you sit down with a communications professional and expert, they can teach you so much about how to make sure that your intention of your message actually gets delivered in a way that's clear and understood by the people you're hoping to communicate to. And that's probably one of the best examples. So I think a lot of it can be taught, and certainly for me, a lot of it was modeled for me by people that I worked with. And so whether they thought they were teaching or not, they were.
Mm-hmm. And I think, as you said earlier, this idea of being self-reflective and humble, then at least in my experience, those kinds of folks tend to be more open-minded and willing to learn and willing to understand concepts like situational leadership and others, so that they can absorb that and then bring it to the table. So,
yeah,
all right,
absolutely.
I want to shift a little bit now and talk about developing a business mindset. I know in your career, you have been part of a legal team, but you have also navigated with a number of different business leaders and CEOs. Give us your perspective on that, on developing a business mindset.
Sure, yeah. Well, for me, this is the best part of being an in-house lawyer. When you can get pulled into the part of the business where your input is being looked for, and it's not really clear. It's not like law school where it's clear this is a legal question, right? And so to me, that's the aspiration. And I was fortunate to be kind of introduced into in-house legal work in a department where there already was a high degree of trust between business leadership and the legal team. And so frequently we'd get invited to a meeting and there was actually no legal issue. They just wanted us there to be informed. It's really only later in my career that I learned that that's not the case everywhere, And so I'd say a few things about this. I mean, first of all, we talked before about how the job changes. When you leave a law firm, legal advice is no longer your work product, right? When you're at a law firm, somebody needs your advice on something, or they need you to draft some documents, or they need you to do some work, and that is the work product, and you're sort of paid and valued based on that. It's clear. It's like a widget, right? But at a company, I mean, the fact is, no company actually has to have a legal department. Any company, even large companies, could function without a legal department, right? They could outsource all of it. And so the question is, why is the legal department here as an in-house lawyer? Why are you here? And it has to be to add more value than the business could obtain just by going to a great law firm where there are experts on any legal issue you'd want. You have to add more value than that. And so I think for good lawyers and good legal teams, it's starting with the end in mind, right? What's the business trying to accomplish? And the whole business, right? So the fact that we've reviewed a contract really as well as a contract can be reviewed doesn't necessarily mean we've done our job if we haven't facilitated actually getting that thing signed so we can ship product and recognize revenue. You have to understand it in the context of what the business is seeking to do. And so asking good questions, coaching people to ask really good questions of the business partners and to actively listen and understand what are we trying to accomplish here. It's not uncommon that the business is trying to do something which on its face you'd say, wait, there's no way we can do that, right? That's going to be an issue under this law or this regulation. But if you ask good questions, why are we trying to do this again? Like, why was this structured this way? And actively listen and engage in a dialogue with them. It's very frequent that my teams have been able to come up with a better way, not just a better way from a legal perspective, but often a better way for the business to actually achieve its business goals. And now the legal risk that previously was like a red stop sign now has been totally mitigated. And when you do that, it builds a ton of trust and teamwork. It gets legal a seat at the table in building business strategy. You get invited back to meetings that you wouldn't necessarily have been invited to, is not clearly a legal issue. And then you can add, a lot more value than if you're just sitting in your lane waiting for the legal issue to sort of fall into your inbox.
So I want to take from that and add to our list of attributes creativity. It sounds like what you're saying. Yeah. And I've observed in my career and in this role over the last couple of years as president of the chapter, that those in-house functions that do have authentic leaders at the helm, whether it's, at the broad legal function at the GC level or within a unit, and also have creativity, that they really do become trusted partners for the organization. It's not just, we have a legal issue, let's go see Jane or Joe,
right.
But let's, as you said, get these folks at the table to help solve problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, listen, to get through law school, I'm generalizing here really broadly, but to get through law school, you got to be smart, right? And then you've got to be good at analyzing issues. And that has value well beyond cranking out a contract or, telling someone whether they have freedom to operate under these patents, right? But good lawyers are good problem solvers. And so that's a tool that can be deployed within a company in a lot of ways beyond just what people might consider giving legal advice. So in my experience, when you can help position the folks on your team to be viewed that way by the business, they love it, So then they thrive, they're building connectivity with the business. Has tremendous retention value, right? Like, there may be another job available across the street at another company, but are they going to have that specific business environment there? Is the culture of the company that way? Has that been facilitated and cultivated in the way that it was when I first joined the legal department I joined? Maybe not. So as a leader, it pays dividends in a lot of ways. And you may need to do things at the top of the house to try to get buy-in from other business leaders to think of your team that way, but it's well worth it.
So for the folks that are new to in-house within our listeners, how do you balance, Larry, that, and sometimes we've talked about wearing a legal hat versus wearing a business hat.
Yeah. For
someone that's new to this role, what's the balance? How do you navigate that?
That's a great question, and I probably don't have an easy answer for it because, well, I'll give you a legal answer. It depends. Business guys love when you say it depends, but it does depend because, first and foremost, you're there to give legal advice. So if people can't rely on you to give timely, clear, actionable legal advice, you may have a bunch of other good ideas, but actually they're not going to be that interested in that until you've done the stuff that you were hired to do in the first place. And so I think, and not all business people are really that eager to hear, business strategy advice from the lawyer or from the, VP of HR for that matter, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you have to earn trust, and you earn trust first and foremost by building credibility, right? Your credibility helps you earn trust. And I mentioned the Bill George book before. Another really impactful book for me that I learned was recommended to me along the way was Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And he goes through some really good analysis there of, he makes a comparison between high trust organizations and low trust organizations. And he talks about the efficiency tax that low trust organizations pay in getting stuff done when people don't trust each other. And then the premium you get when you're in a high trust organization. And all of us have experienced that at some point or another, maybe not even in the workplace, but being a part of organizations where people really trusted each other. And you're like, wow, we're winning all the time. We're getting stuff done. It's fun to be here. And then the other environment, right, where it's a low trust organization, you're not getting stuff done. There's things you can do to cultivate that trust as a lawyer. And it starts with credibility, but then being willing to go beyond just the four corners of what's asked of you, showing your business partners that you've got skin in the game. Like, you know, for example, like I said before, if you tell them what you want to do won't work from a legal perspective, and it's a black box and you don't explain yourself and you walk out of the meeting, the rest of them, like, what's happening in that meeting after you leave? The rest of them are like, well, oh, great. Okay, so now what do we do? Whereas if you say, hey, let me lean into this, let's figure out together how we solve this problem, you end up in a totally different space. And like, I can think, just saying that, I can think of some of the patent attorneys who worked with me and on my teams over the years, who ended up really like beloved by the engineers they worked with, because when they would say, well, actually there's a patent, there's an issue here with a competitor's patent, that wouldn't be the end of the conversation. It would be the start of an entirely different conversation where they're helping redesign the product, you know, in a way that avoids the legal issue. And in some cases, you know, you get to the point where they say, well, you know, the end result is not a bug, it's a feature. Like, we've redesigned the product in a way that's better and avoids the legal issue. So that builds tremendous trust. And I guess the last thing I'd say about that, Gemma, is when you're known as one of those people who tries to find a solution creatively, as you were saying, when the time comes when you have to say, hey, wait a minute, guys, we cannot do this from a compliance standpoint or a legal standpoint, or an ethical standpoint, and you're known for being someone who rarely says no, but often says, well, wait a minute, let's find another way, people will listen, right? At that point, you have the credibility of someone who's a problem solver. When when you're the person then who says, guys, actually, that's the third rail, we cannot do that, they'll respect you for that and appreciate that you can do that.
That's great. So I'm pulling on some threads here. We've talked about self-reflection and humility, a little bit about creativity. I'm hearing a lot now also about listening. So keeping that last attribute in mind, I want to shift now. We touched upon empowering your people, and part of that is developing an inclusive culture. So when you think about what we've chatted about so far, what are some elements, if you are speaking to a future leader within an in-house function, what are some elements that would be critical for developing an inclusive culture, which inherently also means empowering your people? Yeah,
you're right. It all does tie together. So it's a great question. And we touched on some of this already, as you said. You know, I think one point I didn't mention earlier when it comes to like, it's a different job when you're a leader, is to be aware that, again, I very firmly believe that when you're in a leadership role, you don't magically become special as a person. And unfortunately, you see some people who end up in a leadership role who make that mistake, right? They start acting different, and that can really be detrimental. But your role is special. Like, there's no way to avoid that. When you're in a leadership role, what you say and what you do, how you act towards people can have an outsized impact on them, whether you like it or not, and good or bad, you know? And so you have to be mindful of that, particularly when it comes towards building that kind of inclusivity that drives a successful team. So, you know, what do I mean when we talk about an inclusive culture? Right? It's a culture where people can speak up. They feel comfortable speaking up. And sometimes I've found it's helpful for me to be even like really literal, like to say to people, I want you to feel comfortable speaking up, right? I can disagree with you, but I will value the courage, the act of speaking up, even if in the end of the day, the idea you put on the table doesn't win or doesn't help us come up, right? Often the best idea comes from one idea that's not quite right, and then someone iterates on it, that's still not quite right. Eventually, as a group, you end up with a third idea that's no one's own idea, and actually that's the winning idea. Sometimes it's good for people to hear that from you, very literally, right? That's how we are going to win as a team, when everyone contributes. And even if I don't agree with or value the substance of what you said, I will value the act of you speaking up. And people have to know that's true even if they disagree with you, right? So very healthy, inclusive culture is one where people see that someone can say in a meeting, wait a minute, what'd you just say, Larry? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, or I don't know why we're doing that, right? Not disrespectfully and not like in a way that's not constructive, but when people see that and they see a leader go, all right, actually, you know what, you've got a point, or geez, I don't understand that, but like, let's talk about that more so maybe I'm missing something. It doesn't take much, but when people see that, then they're more willing to be the next one who speaks up when things aren't quite right. And I mean, often things aren't quite right. Like often things could be better. And so that's important. It's important for people to feel like they can disagree with each other in a respectful, constructive way, like that you're not trying to get everybody to quickly fall in line behind someone's decision. If actually after the meeting gets out, they're like, geez, I don't know why we decided to do that. You know, like, let's put that on the table. And actually, that's a lesson I learned early in my career from the guy who ended up becoming our CEO at Cultivating. Probably the only time I can remember him being really annoyed with me was when I said something to him on the flight home about something we talked about in the meeting. And he said, Jesus, well, where were you? We were talking about that 4 hours ago in a conference room. Why didn't you speak up then? And he was right, because if I had spoken up then, actually, we could have all solved the problem together instead of just the two of us talking about it on the plane. And I guess the last point I'll bring up, because a lot of what I'm talking about is inclusivity from like a business culture perspective, but people have to be able to be their authentic selves at work. And as a leader, you are the one responsible for making that the culture. And so if you have people on your team who don't feel like they can really be true to who they are, whatever that means for them in terms of their background, that is on you as a leader. And if the company as a whole has that issue, it's still on you as the leader to be the one to walk into the executive leadership team meetings and say, hey, we've got a problem, right? Like, people don't feel like they can be who they are at our company. And you know, every company has a mission statement today that says they want to be diverse and inclusive, but not every company is actually doing that. And when you're a leader, you know, you can't look to your left and right and say, hey, who's in charge of this? HR, are you in charge of this? No, it's actually part of your job.
Well, and it's interesting because I think too, the act of encouraging questions and debate or disagreement, you know, Larry, what you said really doesn't make sense to me. It may be because I am, as my authentic self, who I'm showing up as a white cisgendered woman might be one view, whereas my person of color, you know, next to me, I'm not articulating this well, might have a different view. And so when you have the ability in those meetings to feel safe and to challenge and to debate, then oftentimes you avoid groupthink and you're bringing more to the table. So
Totally.
I understand your CEO challenging you on the way home on the plane. It would have been interesting, right, if you had the courage or the forethought, whatever it was at the time, to bring that up. I've been in that situation as well, where I've got something running through my mind, but I don't have the courage to raise it necessarily.
Right.
And I think you know, as a woman who's been practicing, I mean, I've been in situations over in Japan, for example, back in the late 80s when I wasn't even allowed at the table, even though I was a GC, because I was a woman. So you think about all those dynamics, right? And today, it's incumbent upon us as leaders to be aware, to ensure that people feel safe and they can challenge us and bring those issues up in an open forum and not be dismissed or diminished. Does that make
Right.
sense?
So it totally does. And, again, I mean, Joe didn't have to say that feedback to me, right? He didn't have to say to me, why didn't you speak up in the meeting? When he did, it was both constructive criticism, but it was also empowering, right? Like, this wasn't necessarily a legal issue we were talking about, but he wanted me to speak up in that meeting, right? You're there. I flew you all the way there. What do you think you were there in the meeting for? So that's empowering. And for me, it was helpful for me to encourage my own teams to speak up in those situations. To the point you were making also, you got to pay attention to what's going on at your company and in your meetings and with your team, right? Because sometimes you'll see people well-intentioned, let's assume, I always say you have to assume that people are well-intentioned, stepping on each other in a meeting. I see it happen all the time with men stepping on women when they're trying to talk. Or if I can remember years ago at one of our business leadership team meetings, a colleague of mine made a really good point. And then about 15 minutes later, one of our other colleagues, who was a man, made the same point, and everybody was like, he's got a good point there. And I'm like, wait a minute. She just said that 15 minutes ago. Like, you guys are not listening. And these are all good people, like, who I trust and respect. So as a leader, sometimes you have to be listening for that, because that's someone then is not being able to contribute to their fullest potential because people aren't listening to them. And it is on you as a leader to try to create that environment where that doesn't happen.
Right. So we have a question. Early in the discussion, you mentioned that you use Teams a lot. What are some, so for the aspiring legal leader, in-house legal leader, what are some key steps to developing the right team?
Sure. That's a great question. Well, like I said, just because a group of people show up to the same office or sit on the same page of an org chart or have the same function in their job title doesn't make them a team. And so, like, one of the things I've observed a few times when I've inherited teams is people who do different jobs actually don't know what each other are doing sometimes, right? And this happens not because of anyone's malintent, right? Everyone's busy, and they're just trying to, like, push the rock up the hill to accomplish what they need to do. And often there's just not time for people to compare notes, talk with each other. And so, a big part is helping people understand how the overall department is working, how your overall team is working, how it connects up with a larger strategy, and just share, right? So give people time in meetings. I'll often invite people, not force them, but invite people to share a little bit about some things that they've been working on. And frequently people who sit right near each other had no idea about this interesting project that someone's been working on. And it gives them perspective outside of their own responsibilities. Another thing I love to do is create opportunities for cross-training. So I've had excellent, let's say, patent attorneys on my team who, when you get to know them, you find out they have interest in doing a deal when the next time we have an acquisition, beyond just doing the patent diligence or negotiating a contract. And when you know that people are interested, you don't want to force that, right? Because if you force it, you're asking somebody to do something they're not qualified to do and not interested in. But when most people are actually interested in doing more than just the work they're great at over and over again. That's my experience. Most people are. And then you can create an opportunity for peer mentoring. So you ask the person who's an expert in compliance to spend some time with the contract attorney, and then the next thing you know, you've got a contract attorney who's conversant, maybe not expert, but conversant in compliance issues, but they're actually the one who's probably going to see it develop sooner than the compliance function. So they can counsel in the moment to provide some preventative medicine for what could otherwise be an issue for the company. And then now these people are partnering with each other to develop their own skills and expertise, and you're building trust and relationships and knowledge, and now these folks can work together a little bit better. I've done that myself in my own career. Years ago, in kind of a leadership review that I went through, one of the pieces of feedback was I could be a little sharper on finance. I'll explain an issue well, but I don't speak enough in terms of financial terms, which lawyers get a lot. And I'd say, well, he's right down the table from me is like the best CFO I've ever met. So like, do people really want to hear from me? And their point was, well, it's not necessarily that you need to be expert, but you should be able to explain, what the legal risk is in launching this product with some context from a finance perspective. So I reached out to him and said, hey, would you be willing to engage with me, and kind of what I call micro mentoring? Like, I need a little bit more exposure to what you guys do over there. And he was great. He'd invite me to some of his meetings. I'd just sit and listen. I'd take notes, questions. We'd take him out for lunch. Hey, tell me why this was an issue, when you met with your FP&A team. I learned a ton from that. And so I've encouraged other people to do the same. And you can do that within your own department or cross departments. And it really does build team within your department and also help your folks in legal feel more a part of the team within the business.
And I think one of the outputs of that as well is oftentimes there are functions that don't completely understand what legal is bringing to the table, and it allows for some cross-pollination, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And anytime we can be less of a black box and something that people understand more, then they really appreciate the value that we bring. And vice versa. I very much like to invite functional leaders from other parts of the company to come to our team meetings and explain a little bit about what their priorities are, and then talk a little bit about the intersection of, let's say, investor relations and legal. How do we work together? Now, that might be information that's not relevant to, let's say, a paralegal in the IP department, but it's interesting, right? And it helps them understand, again, the overall legal department and gain some respect for the work that, let's say, the securities paralegal or the securities lawyer is doing within the legal department. So it helps, bring a little context to, like, why are we here and what are we doing as a team?
Mm-hmm. So when you look at the teams you've had over the years, or even just a theoretical or hypothetical team, what do you believe motivates the next generation of legal leaders? What's incumbent upon current leaders as we think about the next generation?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think, again, sometimes people can go for years just with their head down, working and not spend a lot of time considering, like, where am I going with my career? If you get a good performance review and you like where you're working and you get your merit increase at the end of the year, sometimes people are satisfied with that. I think it's helpful if you can engage people in some of their own introspection of, like, what do I want to do next? How do I develop? What types of work excite me? What types of work do I find rewarding, challenging? Because, again, everyone is different, and it's very dangerous as a manager or a leader to make assumptions about that. But it can be hard. It's not uncommon for really great people on your team, if you ask them that question, to say, particularly earlier in their career, to say, honestly, I don't know. Or they'll tell you they know, but the answer is very much tied up in a job title or a spot on the org chart. And that can be really dangerous because it's really much more about the work and the responsibilities and where that particular role makes an impact in the company as compared to a job title. So getting people to unpack that, I think, is really critical. And as a leader, you can drive those conversations, whether it's in team discussions, or skip level meetings. One of the things I've done for years now, since a culture project that we developed at Cultivating when I was at Cultivating, is this idea of having quarterly development time. Because one of the biggest reasons when people say to you, I don't really know actually what I want to do next, or if their answer is kind of thin, like it's tied up in a job title, the root cause of that often is that everyone's too busy to think about what they want to do next. And as a leader, actually, one of the real risks of that is that people don't think about it until they get called by a headhunter about a job at another company. And that's the first time they start thinking about it, is when somebody waves an attractive opportunity in front of them. But having some time, as a leader, creating some time for your team and your people to think about their own development and to think about what would I want to do next, is really important, because otherwise often people feel like, well, I'd like to do that, but I have all this work to do. And they need to hear from you, actually, that is work. That's valuable work for you and for the company, for you to spend time thinking through what your own development path looks like. And then you're giving them at that point license to invest in that time and their effort, and not feel like, well, the contract that just got dumped on me by email, that needs to be done by 3 o'clock on an emergency basis, that has to be more important than thinking about my own development. People need to understand, actually thinking about your development really is important.
And again, when we talk about organizations that are trust-based organizations, or where there is authentic leadership, that time for career development, the fact that it's on the minds of folks throughout the hierarchy, is an element of, at least in my view, of those types of companies, right, that embrace authentic leadership and trust.
Yeah.
So I want to pull, you mentioned titles, and so I want to pull on that a little bit. If someone comes to you for some mentoring and they say, Larry, I want to be a GC, what are some questions that you might ask that individual to have them be a little thoughtful about that goal?
Yeah, great question. Because, the job title is different everywhere, right? So in my current role, I'm Chief Legal Officer. And if you didn't know anything about my company, you might come up with your own idea about what that means. But you're looking at the entire legal department for Emulate right now. We're a roughly 100-person startup. And from time to time, I fantasize about having a bigger team here to support the company, but you're looking at it. And in other jobs, I've had a job title that might appear to be lesser than general counsel, and I managed and led teams bigger than Emulate's entire company. So, the job title itself is a trap, but if people are really thinking about what you and I would consider to be the role of a general counsel, then it's helpful to think about where they are and what it would take to get to where they're going. And in a way I've positioned it for them is, talk to me a little bit more about this ideal job you're talking about. For a lot of years, my role was kind of group general counsel. So within a larger company, Cultivating, Tyco, Medtronic, I had responsibility for a team of legal professionals supporting a discrete business. And so if I talk to people about, let's say, that job, one way I'd say to them is, suppose that job's posted in 6 months. What do you think the business president, the HR leader, what are they going to be looking at as the ideal qualities for the most successful candidate interviewing for that job? And then let's be honest, how much of that have you done already? And how much of that have you not experienced? How much can you speak credibly to things you've done in your career that line up with what would make someone successful in that role? And that can often be a deflating conversation, right? None of us has a completely well-rounded career, and all of us are better at some things than other. And experience is highly circumstantial, right? People either create those opportunities for you sometimes, or they don't. But once you see kind of, you go through like, what do you have and what don't you have? And when you look at the what don't you have part of the column, it can be a little bit deflating, but I'll quickly turn it around and say, that's the first draft of your development plan. So let's now let's prioritize the stuff on there. Like, there's a bunch of stuff people would be looking at that you might not be interested in doing. Let's put that to the side for the moment. And let's focus on the stuff that's both necessary for the job you eventually want to get, and also really interesting to you. And now let's talk about how we get experiences for you. It might not be a job change. It might just be a project. but how we get you those experiences in a way that I can help set you up to be successful. And if we have that conversation that way, often they'll walk out feeling pretty fired up about that. Now you're doing something to take control of setting yourself up, maybe not for that job, but maybe another one like it.
So you mentioned that title is a trap, and but I certainly have had GC roles and non-GC roles, and like you, have managed teams when I was not a GC that were larger and having a larger budget.
Right.
But across that, when you're in management, you're managing people, you're managing money, you're managing the business. What would you advise this individual are the key things that they would need to bring to the leadership role, whether it's at the GC level or a group level or even just a business unit level? Name some key attributes for me.
Sure. Well, curiosity is important. You're going to want to spend a lot of time learning about your own team, particularly if you come into a new organization, learning about the business. How does the business perceive the legal department? How do you want it to be perceived? Similar to that conversation with someone who's planning their own career path, right? You may have a journey to go on to build trust and credibility, to get to put your department and your team in the best position to add value and succeed and be viewed as that essential business partner. So you have to have those conversations across the business, within your team and across the business, being really clear on strategy. So if the legal department has its own strategy that's intrinsic to what we think of as the successful practice of law, and it sits in a silo disconnected from the overall business strategy, you can have the issue where your team and you think you're doing great work, and the business is like, what are these guys doing? And I've seen that at times in companies, and if you hear people talk about cultures where the legal department is like not so jokingly called the sales prevention department, or there may be some of that behind that, and figuring out how do I position around that, or how do I build around that or past that is important. I think in a general counsel role, whether it's kind of top of the house general counsel or business unit general counsel, and you're managing a decent sized budget, you really do have to spend a lot of time understanding the drivers of that budget. And one of the most valuable things my teams have been able to do over the years is to understand the budget so well that we can pull levers when the business needs us to. So if the business says, as happened with a lot of people and their companies and departments in the last couple of years, hey, because of circumstances that have nothing to do with you, we said we were going to spend X, and now we have to spend 2/3 of X. You got to know what you're going to do. What levers are you going to pull? How can you communicate what the consequences are of spending less than you thought you needed to spend? And how can you mitigate the downside of that? And also, it doesn't happen as often, but if somebody comes to you and says, actually, you could spend more than what you had budgeted, good to know before they walk in what you would recommend. And getting your team involved in that conversation is really impactful, really impactful.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do that, they're going to be looking at each other going, well, why are we getting squeezed? Why is Weiss squeezing us here? And doesn't he know how hard we're working? And on the other end, if you get them involved at like what would be the most impactful way for us to spend if we had an opportunity, they say, well, actually, I'd pursue this patent strategy, or maybe we'd file this lawsuit that we didn't think we had funding for, or maybe we'd invest in this legal IT system that's going to help make all our lives easier that we didn't have budget for. Getting their buy-in on that, will help. First of all, it'll help you get the best ideas, but also help give them input into the decision. So I think financial understanding of the legal budget is really critical, and also understanding of the business finance impact of things that legal does or doesn't deliver.
So I have a question. Is there such a thing as a lineal career path today for in-house attorneys?
Yeah, That's a great question. When I was at Medtronic, I was one of the folks leading the org design project there for the legal department, which is a challenging and a complex undertaking. And one of my colleagues had a great metaphor responsive to this question. He said he used the metaphor of a it's not a ladder anymore, it's a jungle gym, right? So your best opportunity as you're trying to get these new and different experiences that get you to where you want to go is not always a straight line up, right? It might be a step sideways. If you talk to people who end up becoming like CEOs or business presidents, you know, a lot of times, or leaders of other functions, a lot of times they'll take a step that might even look like a step backwards from the outside until you understand the differentiated experience that they're getting by doing something that maybe takes them from, I don't know, vice president to director, whatever, right? That on paper and job title, that might look like a step backwards, but actually they're getting an experience that they didn't pick up along the way that otherwise they'd just be leaving behind them in the rearview mirror. And so I think, I mean, my own career path, you would never draw it up this way, right? And so much of it was circumstantial. And so I really encourage people to be open to that. Because I remember like when I was offered the chief international counsel role, came home from that dinner and told my wife, and she was like, well, that sounds great. You know, you're going to be great at that job. And I said, really? Like, what? I don't know anything about how to do that job. Why do you think I would be great at that job? It seems like I'm being set up for a colossal failure. But you have to be open to this sort of out of left field idea. Doesn't mean to take all of them, but you know, let me think through like what opportunities does this present me. And then similarly, when I was offered to leave that job, required me to move my family down to Connecticut. I remember my wife and I talking, and I sort of felt like, geez, it's a great opportunity. And if I'm not open to this now, I mean, am I saying I'm probably never open to this? You know, so let's see what it's about. And it turned out to be an incredible role for me.
So one last question. For the non-managing in-house attorney who aspires to be a leader, what is your professional development tip?
So someone who's not managing anyone today.
Not a non-manager, yeah, the non-managing in-house attorney.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've had folks really struggle with this with me over the years. Because in org design, right, you frequently don't want to have the HR function, and the leadership of a business is not going to want to have a lot of people managing 1 and 2 people, right? That's not thoughtful org design. And so how you get that first managerial experience can be challenging. And I think that the first step is to be having a candid conversation with your manager and other members of leadership. If you're in a larger department and the general counsel has skip level meetings where you might get a chance to sit with them, which hopefully most general counsel do, you know, feel free to put that on the table. You know, I'm interested in managing. That's something I want to do. I've had folks where I've said the opportunity doesn't exist today, but there is training available. So we can get you trained up before you're in the role. That's novel, right? Didn't happen for me. I got trained up after I was in the role, but you know, that's a thing I can do today. And so that's the question, is like, what can we do today? The other thing I would say about both managing and leading, and particularly leading, is and in the culture project I worked on at Cultivating and Medtronic, this is a big theme that came out of it, is anyone can lead. Like, look for opportunities to lead. It doesn't have to be, I sit on the top of this pyramid shaped page on an org chart, therefore I'm the leader. Look for opportunities where you can lead a project, an issue, and again, have that active conversation with your manager or with the general counsel if you get that opportunity to say, this is something I aspire to. I'm looking for a chance to lead on something. You know, I was fortunate that a lot of those opportunities were given to me, you know, probably sooner than it would have been responsible for members of leadership to give me those opportunities. But then you step up and people are like, well, you figured that out, you know, let's see if we can jump on this other grenade over here. And over time, people come to appreciate that before you've been in the quote unquote leadership role on an org chart, you've demonstrated leadership abilities.
Well, Larry, the time has really flown by. I feel like we could keep talking for some time more. I really appreciate your openness and your insight. And thanks to the audience for engaging with us today. This is my last Be the GC. I finished my term as president at the end of this month. Please let us know if you'd like to see other things like this through the chapter, and reach out with any suggestions at all. Again, Larry, thank you so much. It was really fun.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation and honored to be your last interview of this kind. So thanks for the invitation.
Take care, everyone.